Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Feldman, and this is, what's her name?
Kathy.
Yeah, she's wondering where all our friends are. We're going to be delivering this to you before class to make it a bit easier and more convenient for you. I hope the music doesn't bother people for whom that's not their, actually, I don't know if you can hear the music, but I hope it doesn't bother those for whom it's not their custom. I want to wish a Ramadan Kareem to those celebrating, and a good week to those who are seeing some lightening of regulations. We're glad to have. Are you glad to have your older siblings return to school?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But many of us are still at home. What we're going to do today, or for this week, in 303 British Literature, the week that focuses on Swift and begins Defoe, is to do a few small segments, first on satire, then on sort of the proto-novels of the time, and later in the week, specifically on Journal of the Plague Year. I'm going to break this up, I hope, into 3 separate units and post it before class, and then use class to discuss it. Before we get into that, actually, I just want to review where we stand. I hope it's always helpful to take stock of what we've done thus far and describe how we've gotten to the place where we are in the course. We've been talking about the transition from Renaissance to Restoration, and then later to the Enlightenment period, which occurs in several waves. The first period in the early 18th century, the beginning decades of the 1700s, is called the Augustan Era, the era that we are still in, although we are coming towards the end of it now. We've been talking about the 1700s, 17 teens. That was the beginning of the Spectator. This week, we're actually talking about the 1720s, although we're going a little bit out of order since Robinson Crusoe, our next major work, it actually is written after the one that I'll be talking about today, Gulliver's Travels. Professor Kohlbrenner, in his discussions with me that I posted, and I hope you listen to online, describes a shift away from religious enthusiasms and the religious disputes of the 17th century towards questions of a secular nature: politics, poetics, and philosophy. Convenient to put it in 3 P's, although the philosophy is a PH. Politics, poetics, and philosophy. It had been assumed that it had been recognized, not by all, but it was evident to many that the bloodshed and conflicts of the 15th and 16th, and indeed even into the 17th century, many of the great wars, the long conflicts of the Renaissance, were due to religious contests and religious differences. The Protestant-Catholic schism, the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, and as Professor Kohlbrenner said in his recordings, which you must listen to, they're very good. Religion dominates all elements of discourse in the Renaissance. Everything is, in a way, sublimated to religion. People don't stop being religious, and it's not like secularism prevails in the early 18th century, in the early 1700s. It was simply that religion was put in a different sphere, privatized, or not privatized, it's a contemporary word, but made into a private pursuit, one in which it can thrive precisely because it is not subject to public debate and public whim. In its stead come all kinds of new ideas about how to seek out truth, namely from observation and debate. John Locke, and as well as Thomas Hobbes, and among others, David Hume, Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, the so-called fathers of the Enlightenment, will propose a new way of establishing truth. Again, these are mainly religious thinkers, not all of them, but they're mainly religious in their own right. But they assume that we cannot know in our own minds what is true. We cannot a priori, before the fact, know what is right. There's a shift in what Milton had called right reason, and the Enlightenment figures in the period of the British Revolution, the period after the Renaissance, shift from assumed or received knowledge to observation, to what can one find out on their own. The exercise of proper thinking as a new kind of, indeed, philosophy. This involves experiments, discussion and debate, reading, and above all, empirical thought, trying to understand the world as one sees it. It is not one only personally, not just me, but what humans can find out. And so this emphasis on observation puts a great deal of privilege, prioritizes human experience. What can people find out? What is the experience of the world, of individuals? Individual, not just me personally, but it could be me personally, but any individual could be a receptacle of wisdom. This has led to what some of the readings that we've encountered thus far in our early 18th century explorations of groups of readers and like-minded people with the proper taste reading The Spectator, this early weekly and then daily newspaper established by Joseph Addison and his partner Richard Steele, to a kind of popularization or democratization of Enlightenment thought that they espouse, but they're not alone. They were just the example that I used. And then to more recently, and this is my topic for the next 10 minutes of this video, to the satirical writings of Jonathan Swift, an Irish, somewhat radical revolutionary figure who is likewise partner to the rising discourse of individual free thought and independent thinking. I'm going to pause now, and we're going to turn to some of the works of Jonathan Swift, his satirical works for which he is best known. We talked last time about A Modest Proposal, and now we'll turn to Gulliver's Travels. We're going to pick up with that in a second. You may open the introduction and a frontispiece to Gulliver's Travels that are posted on the course site. Excellent. We're now returning to our exploration of Jonathan Swift. Again, last time we spoke about A Modest Proposal, a horrific description of how to alleviate the poverty and suffering of the Irish through a draconian, morbid account of using the excess, the surplus young babies of the poor in Ireland, turning mothers into breeders, and butchering these children to create all kinds of new delicacies, fine fricassees, and ragu. Now, it's evident to you and me why this is horrible, but this is because you have several hundred years of reading history behind you. In talking now about Modest Proposal, not in close detail as we did last week, but in a more general view, and we'll pair it with the preface and beginning of Gulliver's Travels, that is down here. So these works in tandem, and I'll try to fit into the next few minutes also a look at John Dryden's Progress of Satire. I want to focus on two elements. The first is the exercise of independent thinking, right reason in a mode of reading. And the second will be literature and its place, its ability to assert truths in order, and indeed to impart some kind of wisdom. So first is right thinking, how one reads, how one sees the truth. And second is, what is the role of literature in this changing time? To begin with the first topic, well, Mana's proposal poses as a kind of pamphlet, a political treatise that tackles a problem in a kind of technocratic, almost bureaucratic sense. Someone who is writing an essay that could have appeared in The Spectator. Here is a horrible problem of poverty. How can we alleviate it? Of course, the joke is on people who read those kinds of works and don't understand exactly what they are saying or what it is that they're reading. Kind of pedantry or self-satisfied, a complacence, fancy words that mean a kind of self-satisfaction about how smart we are. Well, let's debate this problem and come up with the smartest, most efficient solution. What the essay, Amada's proposal, really conveys is a test of, are you really in the know? And that test is what we can call a satire. It holds a kind of mirror in writing up to the reader. Can you recognize yourself in this text? The joke is really, and this is the exercise of wit. And then for this, I want to go back to John Dryden, a figure that we haven't talked about, but came up a great deal in Professor Coldrunner's recordings, and it's incumbent upon me just to make you, in passing, aware of it. John Dryden is not of Jonathan Swift's generation. Swift is of the generation of people like Joseph Addison, and another major figure whose name I want to drop here, just that I can say I mentioned it, Alexander Pope, probably the most famous and influential figure of this era, Alexander Pope. Sometimes this era is even called the Age of Pope. Alexander Pope is probably the leading writer, the leading poet of this era, the early 1700s. Before them, a predecessor, or the predecessor to all of them in the Restoration era, is a figure by the name of John Dryden. John Dryden is a major dramatist, a playwright, poet, mainly known as a poet, and an occasional critic, essayist of the years after the restoration of the British throne until the glorious revolution of 1687, this parliamentary democratic non-bloody revolution. And Dryden is known for, he's the key literary figure in those years. Now, why am I turning back to this restoration figure who was an influence upon Swift, Addison, and Pope? Is because of this essay, or a fragment of an essay. Dryden wrote in biting, acerbic terms about the people of his time. He's sometimes funny, but mainly just mean, at least to our mind today. He's kind of a late night comic in writing in very polished verse. And in just a minute or two, I want to look at, in the next minute or two, I want to look at this, this excerpt that I've posted here, taken from an essay called The Progress of Satire. It's an essay from this leading Restoration satirist, someone who had, this was a formative figure for someone like Swift. And then later, we'll talk later in the next few classes about Defoe, but also all those figures of that age. And although you can see the writing here from the 1660s, this is from the 1660s, so back in that era of Samuel Pepys and the fire and the plague, you can see now how the writing has changed by the time we get to Addison and Swift and soon Defoe. How easy it is, John Dryden writes, how easy in this Progress of Satire, how easy it is to call rogue and villain and that wittily. What is this property of wit. How easy is it to call someone who is a rogue and a villain? And this was an era of very lax morals and suspicions about the motivations of others. How hard to make a man appear a fool, a blockhead, or a knave, someone could be like a dolt or an idiot, without using any of those opprobrious terms, without being directly insulting, to spare the grossness of the names, yet to do the thing yet more severely is to draw a full face and to make the nose and cheeks stand out, and yet not to employ any depth of shadowing. How it's easy to call someone, to insult someone to their face, to call someone a rogue, a villain, a criminal. But it is much harder to make that apparent, to draw out the ridicule of someone, the absurdity, without using any such names, without making it obvious. That is the mystery of the noble trade. That is what the master writer does, which yet no master can teach to his apprentice. To give the rule, to say this is how it's done, but not make it. But this is not something that can be directly learned. It is a matter of what came to be called in the era of the Augustan age, matter of taste, matter of skill. This is what separates the accomplished writer, the witty writer, from a common man. A witty man is tickled while he is heard in the manner, and a fool feels it not. A witty man, someone with wit, can both do this and also appreciate it. Someone with wit can understand that he's being tickled, but the fool would not understand it. It is a matter of right thinking. Wit separates the blockheads who don't understand that they're being insulted from those who realize that they're being made fun of. If it be granted that in effect this way, that a man is secretly wounded as though he be not sensible enough. A witty person can insult you can insult someone and they wouldn't even realize that they're not sensible, they're not aware of having been insulted. There's a vast difference between a slovenly butchering of man. It's easy for anyone to stab someone with words or actually butcher. Remember, this is someone who's coming out of an era of great violence. And the fineness, and this is what Dryden and then his disciples, his followers in the next generation seek to achieve. The fineness of that stroke that separates the head from the body and leaves it stand in its place. The very delicate stroke of the witty words, of the effective satire that separates the head from the body but leaves the head stand in its place. To decapitate, but to do it so elegantly that the head stays right there. I manage my own work more happily. I mean, he praises himself. He gives himself, in the next few sentences, he says where he has achieved this. I manage my own work more happily, perhaps more dexterously. This requires great skill, like dexterous with the hands. I avoided the mention of great crimes and applied myself to the representative blind sides, a little extravagancy, which the wittier man is, he is generally more obnoxious. He realizes what I am actually saying. It succeeded as I wished. The jest went around and he was laughing in his turn, who began to frolic. A truly effective satire brings the laugh, brings the joke back on the one who started it. A truly witty person is able to laugh at themselves. In a modest proposal, isn't that what Swift is doing? He's laughing at people like himself who write these pamphlets, who think about the great ideas of the time. And this, of course, is what happens in the next work. I'm going to pause it again now, and that will be Gulliver's Travels. I'll actually stop the recording, and I'm going to create a separate, so you can watch these on separate occasions. I'll be right back in a minute, in a different recording or a few minutes later, with discussion of satire and Swift in Gulliver's Travels.